Welcome everybody to Expert Talks Online. I'm Lisa Copeland, Senior Vice President of Client Engagement in North America at Equal Experts. This evening is our fifth session in our summer series where we've been covering a diverse range of topics. Tonight, we're going to explore a challenge many companies face to refactor or rewrite their code base. We're very excited to welcome Julie Yonchus, a technical principal here at Equal Experts USA, who's going to walk us through this journey. After Julie's talk, we're going to run a fishbowl with Giordano Scalzo and Peter Snyman, both mobile software experts here at Equal Experts. Now, a little bit about the meeting protocols. You can start adding your questions now using the Zoom Q&A function. We'll be answering the top voted questions, so keep an eye on what questions are being added and vote for those you'd like to see covered. Now, I'm going to hand it over to Julie.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. And hi everyone. I'm super excited to be here talking with you all. My name is Julie Yonchus. I am an engineer. I'm 15 years into my software engineering career. And at this point, I'm actually spent about half that time as a web engineer, the first half. The last 8 years, I've been focused in mobile engineering, where I've kind of stepped out of just the engineering space into some leadership roles, some strategy roles. That's kind of where I find myself today, working with Equal Experts as a technical principal. And yeah, so today the topic is deciding and executing whether a strategy change that you may be looking at or making to either refactor or rewrite a code base or a technical stack or something that relates to that. So yeah, just before we get started, I'll kind of talk about this topic is, it can be contentious. There's many caveats. It's quite nuanced. Like every time you face this decision or consider a strategic change like one of these two options, it's different. Like it's different for every business. So, some places, some businesses have higher levels of caution than others. That's fine. Some have much more complex tech stacks, and it makes a difference in how they approach the strategy. And so it's kind of we're going to be examining some of that in this talk. And in my time as an engineer, I feel like I've seen many different examples of this. So that's kind of where this all comes from. So let's get started. Actually, before we get into software refactoring or rewriting, I want to start by looking at kind of a more historic example. So I am a big fan of ancient Egypt. As a kid, I was just fascinated with the culture and the history. I read as much as I could on it, so I love ancient Egypt. So what we're looking at right here is what's known as the Bent Pyramid. The period where ancient Egyptians were creating pyramids was just a few hundred years. The Bent Pyramid is kind of in the early to mid time frame when they were building pyramids. It was around 2600 BC. I think this is a really interesting example of a refactor. So historians and archaeologists understand and believe that the pyramid was started to be built at sort of the steeper angle that you see at the bottom, and they shifted it halfway through to the less steep angle. And the belief for that, why they did that is there was a nearby pyramid that was finished just before they started construction on this, where it was initially done at that steeper angle, and it had a somewhat catastrophic collapse. The outside of the pyramid sort of crumbled, and just the inside structure that was sort of holding the inner chambers was what was left. That pyramid was called the Medum Pyramid. So they believe that the Medum Pyramid collapsed, and then the engineers working on this pyramid decided, oh, okay, let's mitigate the risk of a collapse here. Let's change the angle. So I kind of like that as an early example of a refactor. Let's fast forward back to our time. We're building software of all different shapes and sizes, maybe not as grand as the Egyptian pyramids, but grand and important for, for reasons today. But, oftentimes we find ourselves faced with challenges, right? Challenges is our software, the software we've built, the software stacks we've built are not meeting the needs that we have. So we need a strategic shift. So I want to look at some of the drivers today for why we look for strategic shifts in our software practices, the software we're building, and why we might be looking at a code base and saying this really needs a big shift in strategy. Perhaps let's refactor or rewrite it. Okay, so one of the primary one that I've seen is the speed of development just becomes like cripplingly slow to the business. This one is something, I guess I've seen this in businesses of all sizes, startups, large companies, tech stacks that are 15 years old, maybe tech stacks that are only 5 years old. In any case, your engineering teams finds themselves in a place where they can't really build stuff very fast enough for the business needs. So this is like one driver, right? One reason why we might find ourselves considering this strategic shift. So another one is changing business needs. Maybe the clients or the customers we're serving need something wildly different than what we've been providing. There's a big market shift that happens, and we need to respond to that. So these are the two primary reasons I see businesses look for like major shifts in like what their tech stack provides. In the history of kind of having seen this, I think ultimately where I've landed is that what people are really looking for across either of these needs is flexibility in their tech stack, in their code base. So flexibility to make new changes, to respond to business needs, and really ultimately flexible tech provides flexibility to the business. It's kind of like an outlook and a viewpoint that I've landed on. Without flexible tech, when you have new demands, new market shifts, you need your tech to do new things, and it can't. You often feel like these guys, which is not fun, right? It feels like things are moving too fast for you. So if a business does feel like this, like maybe the pace of change, the market shifts are happening and they just aren't responding fast enough, they're going to start looking for a strategy change. So where do you start, right? You've said, okay, maybe I know we need a change, but like what change? What change? How do we know what to change? What are where are our weaknesses? How can we gain that flexibility that we need? So I guess before starting a new strategy, you want to just get a lay of the land, get a picture of things. This is sort of in preparation for defining your strategy. So it's like, get a clear picture of what's currently going on, and then understand where you're trying to get to. What's the new picture? What's going on down the road that you need to prepare for? So this is like, before you make any changes, this is all like, let's prepare and gather information to make a strategic shift. And these are the two aspects of this phase for me. So what's going on with understanding the current picture? For me, this is all about metrics. Metrics just help get everybody on the same page. They're easy they're easy to like put into a document and share with stakeholders up and down your business org structure if you have one. They just make it easier to have shared understanding of a problem. So if you don't have metrics that can kind of show this, your speed of development, you know, how much progress you're able to make on a code base and new features on it, like the place to start is gathering metrics that can kind of help create that shared understanding. And for me, this is often like understanding where your time is going, like where your engineering time is going. I mean, where other time is going too, but if you're one of your drivers is that crippling speed of development, you need to be able to communicate, you know, what's slowing us down? Why are we so slow? Why are we you know, unable to keep up with the pace? So a lot of times people will say, okay, let's look at like what time we spend on features versus bugs. If we're spending more time on bugs, that's a red flag. So this is absolutely right. You know, if we're spending more times on features than bugs, then we're okay. That's not always right either. I mean, it kind of depends on, for me, you need to take the lens and kind of look more closely into actually what's happening inside of these, because you may actually still not be achieving like a great pace of feature development to provide that flexibility to the business. So I like to dig into these, and I really like to look at the spread of development work within a given feature or even a bug. And so for me, what I found is that typically within a given development of a given feature, the work that is involved kind of falls into like these four areas. So the first one is really about like defining what it is, what do we need to do with this feature? What needs to be done? What needs to get built? What does it touch? What do you need? What data needs to come in, etc. And you spend some time doing that before you even start building, right? And hopefully you spend time writing unit tests. Hopefully that's you know, you're doing TDD and you're writing your unit tests before your code. And then you spend a chunk of time coding. Maybe that unit testing and that coding is happening in a cycle, ideally. And then at the end, you spend time testing it. You know, the engineer tests it. If you've got a QA team, they probably spend some time testing it. You have a QA and a test cycle that you go through before release. So yeah, so this is kind of where I see work falling within a given feature. And I feel like if you look at each of these boxes and kind of the size of the box, I feel like that's relatively an average healthy amount of effort to have spread out among within the work you're doing for a feature. What I've seen happen a lot at businesses who are facing this challenge of like cripplingly slow development, and a legacy code base and something that is, you know, like feeling like it's causing a lot of problems, is a spread more like this. So the engineering team has to spend a lot more time figuring out how is this new feature going to fit into this code base. You know, it's a lot of inconsistencies. Maybe there's no unit tests on the code that's there, so you have to either write unit tests or kind of work around them. So this is kind of maybe a representation of like an unhealthy spread of time on new feature development. You know, it's even possible that you could have like much worse spread among that. So what I found successful is to actually start tracking the spread of effort within your feature development. So how much time are you spending on just like figuring out how it's going to fit in, versus the actual coding, versus like bugs, and the time you're spending in regression and bug finding after development. Okay, so if your team agrees that like, oh, maybe this would be valuable to capture and incorporate into our metric gathering to kind of like raise visibility into the problems that we're having. You know, you can capture this any number of ways. I'll just throw out a couple of useful ways that I found. I mean, first of all, perhaps t-shirt sizing. So when you finish a feature, you could say, okay, small, medium, large, how much time did you spend on those 3 areas? So the figuring out, the extracting and defining, the feature development, and then how much time was spent in regression for that feature. You could also assign just some percentage increments. But we could find something, whatever works for your team, however this can fit into your existing metrics gathering. Yeah, and then ultimately, once you are able to capture some data like that for a while, share the data, make it visible to decision makers. Really kind of the goal of this is to, 1, create a shared understanding of a problem, but also 2, begin to have metrics so that after you do make a strategic shift, you're able to kind of compare the new metrics post shift to the old metrics and be able to sort of make sure you're improving. So if you do make a strategic shift, you'd look back and you'd say, okay, well, hopefully we're now spending less time on regression. We're spending less time just figuring out how things are going to fit. Yes. Okay. So the second part of that is, okay, so we've gathered metrics. We kind of understand our problems a bit more. Now let's try to figure out, let's understand where we need to get to. So that's the second half of this, is like targeting the new picture. That kind of works with like understanding the business goals. So overall, where are we trying to get to with this product in the next 6 months, the next 1 year, or, you know, even 2 years out? How different is it from what we have now? And what are we missing to achieve this technically? So just kind of like starting to map out, you know, where are we trying to get to? What do we need? What do we need to like provide beyond what we have now? Okay, so this is kind of where we're at. We gathered data to begin to like sort of shape a strategy. This talk is called Refactor versus Rewrite. So those are the 2 like options that are kind of on the table, and often many businesses are considering when they're like, okay, we need a big strategic shift. Thought it would be good to kind of review some of the risks that I've seen with either of these 2 paths. And just having these in mind before you like begin to like decide on what your strategy will be is useful. So what are some of the risks of choosing like a refactoring strategy? Okay. So with with kind of these problems that we've been talking about, oftentimes a business is finding their tech stack or their code base to be like overly complex, perhaps quite messy, perhaps quite inconsistent. It could feel a lot like this if you were to kind of like map out the architecture. It'd be like everything is kind of, there's not any kind of nice, neat, clean understanding. It's all jumbled, right? So maybe the architecture feels like this. And what you're trying to do with a refactor is take your architecture to something more like this, you know, nice, neat, clean layers, defined communication between those layers, you know, defined like this thing exists inside this layer. You're looking for something where your engineers can then kind of look at an architecture and it's going to feel more like this than the jumbled thing above. So you're trying to move from something jumbled to something kind of nice and neat. That's kind of the whole point of refactoring, right? The challenge that comes with this strategy is that depending on the original complexity of the code base and how jumbled it is, it can be really hard. It can be really hard to kind of like incrementally move to that new architecture. It definitely takes the right mix of skills, ideally an engineering team with people who have done this kind of thing before. But yeah, like I said, very hard. So ultimately, what I'm trying to point out here is that many times there's a real risk that you are starting with that jumbled architecture, but you invest in a refactoring strategy and you kind of wind up with just another jumbled architecture. I've come into companies where they've had this experience. So this is a real risk, and it's something to consider and just be aware of. Another risk is with refactoring is lack of stakeholder involvement. So the whole thing with refactoring is that the surface doesn't necessarily change while you're cleaning up things under the hood. And that can be really hard to kind of like keep stakeholders engaged on. And often they can come back in and just be like, what's going on here? I haven't seen anything change. So, I mean, given the right like process and the right like communication level, you can mitigate this if this is the path that you choose. But this is definitely a risk, and it's something to just be aware of. Okay, so let's look at some of the risks of a rewrite strategy. This is a big investment. I mean, it's a huge move for a company to say we're going to totally rewrite a product or even just part of a product. They've spent a lot of money and time on the initial one. It's a lot to chew off, and it's like also it's another thing. It's another big investment for them. Beyond that, often if you're going to do a rewrite, you're not like throwing the old thing out straight away. It's still sitting out there with customers. You might need to be at minimum supporting any issues that come up, but potentially working on things that have been on the roadmap that you've committed to for clients or customers. So just the ability to kind of like keep up with those commitments along with a rewrite for a team can often be, can be very challenging to support. This next one, it kind of aligns with the challenge from the refactor approach too. It's like definitely the technical capabilities of the team need to be considered. Yeah, kind of goes the same. So, okay. Yes. Okay. So in any case, where you're going to end up with, or where you could potentially end up with, if you're not like keeping track of that, is you want an architecture that looks like this, right? Like your nice clean layers with the things moving between them, but you may ultimately end up with something that's kind of the big mess that you're trying to avoid to begin with, without the right technical talent to kind of take you there. Okay. So those are some of the risks. We've talked about the phase of like data gathering. Let's talk about the step where you choose your strategy, right? So now you've considered your risks, you're gathering your data. Let's choose a strategy, right? So what are we doing here? Are we refactoring or are we rewriting? Okay, so ultimately, this is what's different for every single company. So look at your roadmap. What's currently implemented? What do you need to build to achieve what's out there? Begin having technical discussions with your team. So of the stuff that we need to build, how entrenched is it in this complex, like kind of bad code base? Can we carve it out? Maybe spend some time, allow your tech team and your engineers to spend some time sort of analyzing are there some things here that would be useful in this new world and what we're envisioning in the future that we can carve out, encapsulate and reuse. So that kind of is potentially like a strategy that kind of sits in a spectrum between these two. And oftentimes that's what companies choose to do, is they say, okay, look, we're not going to do a full rewrite. We're going to extract a few things out. We'll rewrite some other stuff. and we'll reuse the things we extracted. And it's like a mashup of the two strategies, which actually often, works really, really well. But allow your tech to understand like what your options are there. Allow your tech team time to make those explorations, understand what they can carve out. I guess another thing that kind of happens with the strategy decision here is just getting everybody on board. Often like you've got these business owners who will, they've already invested so much in the existing tech stack. They're afraid of throwing anything away, making a big strategic shift. Often your metrics will help make those decisions. You say, hey, look, we captured these metrics up until now. We're going to use them to drive our strategy going forward. We're going to frequently check in on those metrics. I'm actually going to talk about that next in the next phase. So we'll come back to that. But begin, like, make sure this, I guess, in deciding on your strategy, it's critical to get everybody on board, on the same page, and bought in. Yeah, and maybe also before deciding on a strategy, make sure you have the right technical muscle to sort of successfully navigate the complexity of the strategy that you're choosing. Okay, so next phase is actually executing the strategy. Again, making sure you have shared team understanding of what you're attempting. So if you're attempting like a sort of a mix of the two, or if you're attempting like a full rewrite, making sure everybody knows what is this next version look like. If you're doing something that's shared, making sure everybody's bought in and understands, okay, look, we're gonna pull this out, reuse that, we're gonna build this. This is our hopeful timeline. We're gonna be having these check-ins, just getting like everybody on the same page with your strategy. And definitely ask everyone if they feel like anything is missing from the strategy. Yeah, okay, so I kind of talked about this, getting the right technical and product leadership to help you make sure it's successful. One thing I thought would be fun to kind of circle back to is the Egyptian pyramids. So these are the Great Pyramids. Everybody knows these. They're one of the 7 wonders of the world. These were actually completed only 50 years after the Bent Pyramid. And I think it's fascinating to kind of consider what the Egyptian like engineering, how they had advanced in that time, and just 100 years from when they started that Meidum Pyramid that collapsed to when they finished the Great Pyramids that are now just an incredible piece of human engineering and architecture, and known worldwide. So you can see, but what you can see is that the engineers they learned a great deal in between those different experiences, and they had much more success on this one. Yeah, okay, so we talked about this, scheduling regular check-ins on your status and your progress during the while you're in this execution phase. You're still capturing those metrics that you use to help drive the initial decision. Continue capturing those, and you're checking in to make sure, okay, look, we're hopefully spending less time on regression. We're hopefully spending less time on just figuring stuff out, and we're really building features, creating that flexibility for the business. So keep capturing your metrics and keep checking in. And ultimately leave yourself an out. I've found this critical, especially in the refactor path. If you've decided to say, okay, look, we're just going to refactor slowly a little bit at a time, it could be that you find yourself 6-12 months down the line and your speed of development is no faster, your flexibility is no greater, you're still in trouble, basically, and you've spent a lot of time on refactoring. So give yourself an out, say, okay, look, if our speed of development hasn't improved in 6 months, 12 months, we're going to consider a more drastic a more drastic strategy change. And again, visibility into progress, those are those metrics, but finding something that works within your business. So if it's like weekly status reports to your stakeholders, up your org chart, just finding something that just makes sure everybody knows what's going on and how you're doing. And really ultimately leaving flexibility for new direction. I guess that's one of the goals of what we're trying to do here. But we created that product roadmap of, what are we trying to achieve 6 months, 1 year, 2 year. That could wildly change. So being prepared for that, being able to respond to that. And I'll just close with a reference to how this kind of actually happened with the Egyptian reference. So they spent a few 100 years building pyramids, which is cool, great. But what's really fascinating about the arc of their engineering achievements is after they finished building pyramids, they actually turned to building actually more complex engineering architecture. So this is a Hatshepsut temple built by a Hatshepsut in the side of a mountain, and just an incredible engineering feat for the pre BC time periods. I think this is from 1200 BC still. So basically they turned their engineering energies to building things that served their communities, not just burial tombs for their pharaohs. But it was a change in engineering direction that I think was enabled by the learnings that they did before, but also just fascinating. Yeah, okay, well, and that's it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Julie. And thank you for that walk down Egypt history. I always like entering thinking one thing around tech and people and org change, and leaving with a little bit of historical context about how cool our predecessors were.
Absolutely.
So now we are going to go into our fishbowl. So we'll have Peter and Giordano join us. We will start with some of the questions. So please enter questions if you have any more. Right now we have about 10. The first one, just going in the order, is a pre-talk. Well, we just changed, is from Martin. Doesn't test coverage affect the choice of refactor or rewrite? Low or no test coverage or regression tests to be able to refactor? Writing tests, then confirmation bias, high test coverage. Can you see the effects of the refactoring easily? That was a lot. So doesn't test coverage affect the choice to refactor or rewrite?
I can try and answer that. I definitely think it has an effect on it. I think it can also be a strategy into determining what you want to do in the future. So what I've often seen in some of the products that I've worked at before is when they did have very low test coverage, that might be your first strategy, is try and see what is the complexity to introduce tests, and validating a hopefully small module of that bigger picture. And if that is really difficult, that kind of answers the question, like you say. But if it's easy, it could actually also motivate a refactor instead, because if you can abstract out that component, you can easily swap out and know that the test that you just introduced still works. That's actually a great way of bringing in a refactor into your project.
I can also add that having a good test coverage can help in case of choosing right, because having a good end-to-end coverage can help to understand if the new component of the new app fulfill the requirements. Otherwise, we'll be just prone to do manual tests. So I think that in general, having test coverage is important to either the two strategy you choose. Otherwise, you're risking to implement something that it is not does what you need to do.
Thank you. Another question. This is a pre-talk question that has a couple votes. How do you measure whether the refactor rewrite was successful? What metrics are helpful?
Well, Julie said something during the talk, so I partially answered this. For example, if we decide to rewrite auto-refactor depending on the speed of development, it's obvious that you need to see that the feature are developing faster with the new strategy. I would add another thing that another metric that could be important is sort of happiness of the team or the developers, because a legacy, a difficult decrease the engagement and the enthusiasm, because nobody wanted to work in a dual and difficult to change code base. So I will add also a sort of pre-survey of the happiness, or no, sort of retro before and after. Also, maybe the turnover of the developers can be another important metric.
Yeah, and that's actually an interesting one, Gio, to mention. I feel like turnover, it's almost like a catalyst to the problem. Like basically, high developer turnover can lead to kind of your inconsistent code base and your kind of messy code base that is hard to engineer in. But then, yeah, it's also like the if you don't address the problem, you might continue to have even more developer turnover because it's so unpleasant to work in that code base. So yeah.
This actually leads me to the one extra one that I wanted to add is seeing how easy it is to onboard new developers as well. Because what you usually find if you did a good rewrite or refactor, the next person or any external parties for that matter should be able to understand that code base a lot better from the get-go. Instead of having to take like a week or two. So that's a nice metric to measure as well, I think.
Wonderful. And just to parlay into building tombs for the pharaoh versus impacting everyday life with beauty and appreciation of beauty, we kind of saw the Egypts go and really outward focus and bringing happiness to those who are still living. What kind of tools, this is from Adam, what kind of tools, techniques, subtasks have you used for metric gathering?
I can chime in there. I guess, I've used, it's funny, like I used Jira like back in like the mid, like 2008, and it was terrible. But actually for the last few years, I've been using the latest version of Jira, and it is a little bit better. But I always try to keep it involved in whatever you're using, wherever you're using to like track your stories and your epics. If you've already got like an agile process in place where maybe you're running sprints, just kind of incorporating it into the process that's there, and keeping your numbers aligned with that. Now, if you need to revisit that process and build a new one, I guess that's probably a whole nother talk. But there's if you already have something in place, I would just say find a way to kind of fit it in with that if you can.
Yeah, so I second this. So rewriting or refactoring is another way of implementing feature. So it must be part of the normal process the company is doing. And also it is needed for showing progress to the stakeholder. Because again, we said the stakeholder are not involved. So it's like we are release a feature after 2 sprints, for example. We need to say, okay, we are in this part of the roadmap after this period of time, and then maybe there are when the refactoring is moving on to the other part. So, for example, if one part of the refactoring is to improve the performance, for example, we can show that now the performance are at this level, whereas previously was there. And or for example, the startup time of an application or the code base. So again, really depends on which part of the refactoring you want to tackle on. You want to take measurement and metrics and show to the stakeholder. But in general, yes, probably using the same tools used for the normal feature development.
Yeah, that's a good point, Gio, is like the metrics that you capture can change and be different based on what the business goals are. So we did look at this, the speed of development. Maybe there are other metrics that you're looking for, like a performance or something like that.
Yeah, so I think that this is before starting this journey, because it's a really costly and difficult for everyone. We need to understand why we want to do this and what are the part we want to touch, and then keep track. Because at the beginning, when we say, okay, this piece of code is terrible, let's refactor rewrite, everyone is ready, enthusiastic to say, okay, because you're seeing the lands of greenfield and the paradise. But then when you start to implement, to say, okay, maybe it wasn't too bad what we have before and all this stuff. So we need to keep the ball moving.
Thank you. Another pre-talk question received. If you decide to refactor, what are the risks you must be aware of?
Okay, so we kind of talked about risks in the, I mean, we could call out some more. I'll just kind of go over the risks we talked about in the talk were, one, having the right technical talent. It can be very hard to kind of imagine, like for the engineers to kind of keep in their head both like, what is this current messy architecture? What's architecture are we moving to? You know, and what are the steps, what are the strategic, or what are the, you know, architectural steps we're taking along the way? You have to kind of hold all of that in your head as you're walking this path and sort of, you know, ensure that you're moving in the direction that you want to go. That's like technically quite challenging. So having the experienced team there to make sure you're getting there, that's one risk. I definitely seen companies that are like, okay, we're going to refactor, but they put a team of like junior developers on it who really don't know how to refactor. And then they just spin their wheels for a while. So having the right technical leadership is super important. Also, the right stakeholder involvement and visibility is also important. It's a real risk that your stakeholders won't understand or see what you're doing under the hood, and they'll lose faith in the project and the strategy. Those were the two we talked about in the talk. Guys, do you have any, what do you guys think? Do you have anything to add to that?
I can mention one that I've seen quite a lot in different projects where when you go down the refactor route, actually, it's quite, I think it goes into what Gio was saying earlier, where you need to kind of keep your cycles really short and part of your main sprints. Because what happens if you don't do that is often it spans out in such a long duration that your team might have been swapped out during that time, and then you end up with 3 different variants of your refactor strategies happening to build into your project. So you don't actually follow through on a strategy and complete it. You end up with 3 different variants. So it's a risk, but it's also what I'm trying to motivate is like when you go into these routes, it's important that you keep it short and you try and follow through and get it done to create that consistency in your project. Otherwise, you still end up with a problem where when a newcomer comes in, they don't know what's going on because there's 3 different versions of something happening. So, yeah.
I'll also add another thing regarding the refactor. Again, it's a part of what Judy was saying, that the team must be strong in refactor skills, and be aware that after a bit of refactor, there is a sort of chaos. That is, if you are not doing anything, the chaos is limited. But then when you change something, then something, at the first change, the situation is a kind of worse, because there's so many moving parts. And then after a while, this goes by again instability. So it could be just a wave of the situation. Whereas in the big rewrite, in general, the stability is longer for a while. Then when there's the new app, there's a high peak of chaos. And then again, it goes into instability. It's something that, again, if you're not skilled for that, you can be scared. And for that also, I mean, there's the stakeholder. So because again, stakeholder, they don't know. So they say, okay, I want just to have the feature because my customer client wanted this. And then it's again, it's a matter of communication and everyone must be on board.
Great. Okay, how do you know if you are refactoring, rewriting in the right direction? Failure is a proper teacher, but fail a refactor or rewrite can prove utterly costly. Dollars and cents.
So for me, it kind of comes back to the metrics. I guess, yeah, and you know, defining, you know, what do we want to see to like know what does success look like? So actually, yeah, what does success look like? Define that like before you start your path, before you even choose your path, because what success looks like will shape the strategy that you should take. And then in understanding what success looks like, you know, define how do we know we're successful. So if it is we have faster speed of development, you know, you're tracking that. If it's we have more performant app, you know, app performance, that's the, you know, that's your metrics. So basically define early what success looks like, and define how you'll know it. It's my.
Yeah, just to add to that a little bit, there's I think we often speak about the developer side of this, but there's quite often a business side to this as well. So understanding if your business direction potentially changed could have a huge impact on what kind of technical direction you go into as well. Perhaps your business direction has changed so significantly that you end up having a better solution by doing a rewrite, for example, instead of doing a refactor all the time, because it keeps hampering. It could be small little things, but it keeps hampering at the business choices that you're trying to make. It's not always easy to see these things, but to find a way to measure those metrics, it will also help in making the right choices.
This is in from Brian Guthrie. How do you explain to your board of directors that you've opted for a more risky option like a rewrite, asking for a friend? Shout out to Peter, who's done an awesome job at Meetup. That's nice.
Well, I'll chime in first, but Peter, you might have an answer too. So, I mean, for me, it comes back to a shared decision-making strategy. So if you really want to rewrite, like that's great, that's fine. But I think as a team, you've got to make the decision together. So you have to walk the decision path together, and that includes, you know, all of your engineers, that includes your business stakeholders. And if you strongly believe that a rewrite is the right reason, then you should be able to find the metrics and the data to support that decision, or find and produce them, hopefully. And, you know, in the path of like gathering those metrics and that data, you know, maybe ultimately everybody can see clearly that a rewrite isn't the best option. So it's really kind of gather the data, and keep everybody, you know, like make the decision together.
We'll also add other things. So since the Joe Spolsky article on his blog 10 years ago or something like that, say you should never do a rewrite, also do a refactor. Every time when you are choosing, 99% of the time you are doing a refactor. But sometimes you can't. For example, you are using a hardware that's end of life, or a technology is end of life. For example, using Flash, and you need to implement something else. Or it happened to me in the past when we have an app in Swift 2, and we need to do it in Swift 3. And again, in that case, the size was smaller enough that there was no point of doing a refactor and migrate to Swift 3. We say, okay, it's better to start from scratch in a better architecture using what we learned. But in the case, the size was very small. If you wanted to do a refactor of platform or a rewrite of a platform, it's very, very risky. So because it might be a multi-year change, can be a failure. And so in general, it's better to go for a safer incremental refactor.
Yeah, I'll chime in there. This is actually the third time I've given this talk. And the first time I gave it, I had a lot of feedback from people who are of this, like, you know, like never rewrite, or very, very rarely rewrite, 99%. And I get that. I totally get that outlook. That's like, it make, you know, it's caution, and it's in the place of like a, you know, a rewrite can be very expensive and also not, maybe not get you where you need to be as fast. So it's like, you know, I think it comes back to like, should make the shared decision together and walk the path together.
All right, we have, are there any ways to capture metrics about what time is being spent when tickets are not getting completed?
I guess when tickets are, I'm not sure I understand the question, but I mean, I guess you just have to have a dialogue going on with your engineering team. You know, if you get to, I don't know how you're organizing your work, but if it's in sprints, if you get to the end of the sprint and, you know, nothing's been completed or very little's been completed, you know, you like open the dialogue and understand. I mean, maybe it's everybody was spending time in meetings and it wasn't that they wrote a little code and had to fix 10 bugs because of it. So just like, yeah, you got to start, that's where you're kind of understanding, okay, where are our problems and where do we need to start gathering metrics to track the size of those problems. Hope that answers the question.
Yes, in general, you can track how many tickets are not completed for sprint, for example. Can be as already a metric. If you don't know why, probably the ticket is too big, should be split in subtask, and then again you can have a different granularity to understand better.
Another pre-talk question, how do you balance resources between the work to rewrite and keeping the lights on an existing system?
Yeah, this is the one where I've been in a lot of companies that are facing this decision, and this is ultimately the question that stops a rewrite strategy as much as everybody wants it. But you have to, you know, oftentimes you have commitments and you have to keep supporting those. So, I mean, really, like, you know, yeah, it's trade-offs. Like maybe you're able to say, okay, look, we're putting out version whatever, and we're not putting out another version for 6 months. I don't know, but looking for a path that's available. It's so different for every business. And I've definitely seen companies ultimately decide to do nothing because of this problem.
Just to quickly add again, I guess it's also similar to what Julie was saying earlier, where you need to get the stakeholders on board. So the best chance of success is if everyone is on board together and working together towards it. Of course, the ideal situation would be if you can do the chunks in small bits and pieces at a time. But if it's a large scenario, then if everyone is on board, I think it might be okay because they understand where they're going towards.
Yes, also add that even if a technical thing, the strategy of a rewrite or refactor is a business decision because it's something that affects the business. So it's kind of driven by the business. So if the business say, oh, we are happy that a feature can be implemented in 2 months, even though if your developers are not happy. Because in 4 months, we have this big marketing stuff, we need to do it. In the other hand, if we wanted to say, okay, the business need to move to other market, and the tech team say, okay, we cannot do to another market with this monolith. We need to do something else. So again, it's communication, the stakeholder. I think it's more driven by the stakeholders than the technical team. And then they can decide if can stop the development of new features or not, for when.
Thank you. All right, we're wrapping up with a couple of minutes, so I think we'll just have one person respond to each question and see if we can get through a few more. Thank you, everyone, to the audience for all these great questions. What are the usual time boundaries, if any, have you seen apply to refactors and or rewrites? So time boundaries.
I can know with this. I've been recently in a big company refactoring, and the time was 2 years. The context was exactly like that. Big monolith worked perfectly for the UK, but the business needed to go worldwide, as it was impossible to use the platform in that to change to fulfill all the requirements of the markets. And the plan was 2 years, and we kind of do it. It was 2.5 years. And for the platform, I mean, from the high-level service to all the front ends, the web, all the clients. And a different team have different strategy, but the goal was common for everyone. Smaller refactoring inside a small team can be weeks, a sprint. When you want to say, okay, this part, for example, once I worked in an e-commerce app, and there was a part with validation that was a complete mess for several reasons, and nobody wanted to touch the part. And so we agree with the product owner, okay, 2 developers for 2 sprint, no features, and solve that mess so that we can implement more feature later on that part.
Well, thank you. We do have some remaining questions, so I think we might have to table some of the questions, and we can answer them and get back to everyone when we send the recorded version of this. So thank you so much, Julie, Peter, Giordano. It was a great discussion, and many thanks to everyone for their questions and everyone else in the audience. I hope you all found it really useful session learning here with us. Next week, you can join us for our final talk in the summer series. So you want to onboard a DevOps practitioner with Martin Jackson, an engineer here at Equal Experts. Everyone seems to be so concerned with recruiting DevOps practitioners, but the onboarding of them and getting them the right environment is really difficult. So Martin's going to talk about some tips that he's learned as a practitioner. So sign up, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.